Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesday, a week where we saw a lot of surprises happening, some for good teams, some for bad. We also look ahead to some interesting things to happen soon in college football. I am your co-host, Ian DeMars, and alongside me is co-host Ryan Solomon. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. I was just talking to Ian before that both of my fantasy teams made it to the final, so I am pumped right now because I was projected to lose both of them. But they came through for me, so even though the Packers are eliminated, I can at least cheer for my fantasy teams.
Yeah, and I was able to make it to the finals in one of my leagues as well. I had three opportunities. In the one league where I rarely pay attention to, I somehow made the finals. The other two where I pay attention the most fell a little bit short this week. But I mean, there's always next year, I guess. But at least I made one of the finals.
Yeah, that's still better than none. So at least there's that.
Very true. So let's get on to our first topic of the show. So Thursday night this past week was a highlight of a game between the Los Angeles Chargers and the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City. It was a game where the Chiefs were up by two touchdowns, multiple points of the game. And the Chargers not only were able to find a way to get back into the game, but they were able to win this game late on a 2-point conversion, win 29-28, and I guess you could say, upset the Kansas City Chiefs this past week. So with that win, it puts them in a tie for first place, not only in the AFC West, but for the top spot in the division. Unfortunately, due to a tiebreaker, they're currently not the top seed, but they still did clinch a playoff spot this past week. So this brings the question, who would be the favorite now in the AFC going forward?
Well, looking at it, I still think that it's a two-team race, really. I know people are really high on the Chargers. I know some people are really high on the Texans. I would the Chargers, they lost to the Rams. And who was the other team the Patriots was the other team that they lost to. So those three are all quality losses that the Kansas City Chiefs have had. They narrowly lost to the Patriots. They narrowly lost to the Rams. And they really narrowly lost to the Chargers, who they probably should have beaten because they were up by 2 scores late in that game. And it was really just that conversion, a questionable penalty in the end zone and then that 2-point conversion that ended up costing them the game. But if they take care of business the rest of the way, they'll have home field throughout the playoffs. And you would think that that would be a big deal for the Chiefs playing at Arrowhead, where it's one of the most hostile atmospheres in the NFL. And going to the Patriots, even though people are saying that it's gloom and doom and the sky is falling for the Patriots, this happens almost every year where we see them lose to some teams they shouldn't lose to, and all of a sudden we talk about how they're done and how Tom Brady's fallen off the cliff, and that's never the case. They'll probably still make it to the AFC Championship, if not the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I definitely do think they're one of the favorites just because we really haven't seen a bad performance from them. If anything, you could consider this past week a bad performance. I mean, Patrick Mahomes had his lowest yardage total of the year. I don't even believe he threw for over 250. He did throw a couple touchdowns in the game. But I'm going to go opposite on this one. I don't think they're the favorites right now. I think you have to go with the hot team right now that's playing the best football right now, and that's the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, you look at their win-loss resume. I mean, obviously, the one bad loss you could look at would be the Denver Broncos, a game that they should have won, which was a very close game. But looking at 2 of the past 3 weeks, they've had possibly 2 of the biggest wins in the NFL this year. Winning on a Sunday night in Pittsburgh, a place that's nearly impossible to win on Sunday night, and it was their first primetime Sunday night game in over 4 years. So that's one big win that they had, and that was one where they came back from 16 points down. You look at this past week, another road game, another tough opponent, and another deficit that they're to come back from. This team is playing right at the right time. They're doing it right now without possibly one of their best players in Melvin Gordon. When this guy gets back healthy, this team, I think, is going to be unstoppable. The defense is looking better now with Joey Bosa healthy. Derwin James is a Rookie of the Year candidate. Casey Hayward's been a great corner for that team since signing with them. And you look at the offense, which sometimes doesn't get talked about as much, but Philip Rivers is, you could kind of say, quietly putting up an MVP caliber kind of season. Melvin Gordon's been a great back for them the past couple of years, and they have an emerging young wide receiver in Mike Williams, who had his breakout game this past week with 3 touchdowns, 2 receiving, 1 rushing. And they basically did that without Keenan Allen the whole game. So the fact that they just got 2 huge wins over the past few weeks, I would consider them the favorites right now. This is a team that I would not want to play either on the. I don't want to versus this team in the StubHub Center, which is a soccer stadium where they play, and I don't want to play this team. So I might not even want to play them at home because this team has been so good these past few weeks on the road. They're the team to watch out for right now. They have to be considered the favorites.
Here's my question for anybody that says the Chargers should be the favorite to win the Super Bowl. Why is this any different than any other year that we've been thinking the Chargers had a chance to win the Super Bowl? The Chargers are that classic team that when you expect great things from them, they will inevitably disappoint you. And when you expect them to do nothing, they will come out of nowhere and get close to glory. So if you remember a couple of years ago, they were like a wild card team that barely squeaked into the playoffs and they ended up beating the Bengals in the first round and had a pretty good run in the playoffs. But all those years back when there was LaDainian Tomlinson and Philip Rivers on the team and they were getting seasons with like 14 wins and only 2 losses, they would end up losing in their first round of the playoffs each year that they would play. So why is this any different than that? Sure, they're showing some heroics during the regular season, but they're still probably going to get that 5 seed and have to probably go they're one of the best teams in the AFC still, even though they did have 2 very, very good wins the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get the argument going at here. I'm just saying that at this point in the season, when you're getting down to the end, I think you have to ride the hot team right now. And they're the hot team right now. I mean, you look at Kansas City, they haven't really, I would say, looked the same since the whole Kareem Hunt incident. And you now look at Spencer Ware's injured. So they're still trying to rebuild their identity through the running game. Their defense has kind of been an issue, although Eric Berry did come back this past week. They're still trying to get that figured out. I just think right now the Chargers are more of a complete team because they have been dealing with injuries as well, but they are going through these injuries. The defense is finally healthy. The offense has suffered the injuries, but the offense has looked the same, if not maybe even better at points. So that's why I think right now you have to consider them the favorites just because even with injuries, they still look just as good as without some of their key players.
And you can make that argument, but I think that even though right now you can say that some teams are hot, and it might be the case that they're hot, that doesn't actually mean that they'll be hot when the playoffs happen. So you look at the Los Angeles Rams, for example, like when they beat the Chiefs, you would say that team is on fire. Their offense cannot be stopped at all. Then immediately the next week they went ice cold, and now they've been ice cold ever since. So it can really change on a dime for some of these teams. And we don't really know who's going to be necessarily hot when the playoffs start because everything can change so quickly. So we'll have to wait and see until week 17 and probably into the first week of the wild card round to see who's really playing good football.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think that the 2 teams we mentioned probably have to be the favorite right now, which is surprising because this is going to lead to our next topic. The team we did not talk about that's been the favorite basically over the past decade has been the New England Patriots. And not only them have they lost 2 in a row these past couple weeks, but so have the Los Angeles Rams. And you look at both of these teams, definitely had opportunities in both their games. Look at the the Patriots were driving down the field at the end of the game and couldn't convert in the end. So the same thing with the Los Angeles Chargers. They both had their opportunities to tie the game late, but couldn't. But yeah, they're both coming off of back-to-back losses. But at this point, which one's a bigger deal and which one are you more worried about?
I'm more worried about the Rams. And the reason I'm worried about the Rams is because it looks like there's a formula on how to defeat them. So if you look at what the Bears did, they got a lot of rush on Jared Goff with their interior linemen. They didn't have to bring a heavy amount of blitzers to get that pressure, and that caused havoc with that offense. They bottled up Todd Gurley, and then that formula was followed by the Eagles, who all throughout the season have been a very average team. Now, the Rams have a okay defense that hasn't really performed as well as it probably should have this year, given the talent that's on that defensive line and in the secondary. But they're having trouble beating teams that they shouldn't have trouble beating, like the Bears. I don't think they should have that much trouble with. The Eagles, they definitely shouldn't have that much trouble with. And they look like they're just in disarray right now. And we know that the Rams don't have the same playoff experience that Tom Brady and the Patriots do. Tom Brady has been through this before where people say he's washed up and they say Bill Belichick's out of ideas and they say that team's going nowhere. He's faced that adversity before. He knows how to win in the playoffs. That's not the case with the Rams, who so far with this new regime are 0-1 in playoff games. So I'm definitely more worried about the Rams than I am about the Patriots because I think the Patriots can find a way to get it done. The Rams, we have yet to see that they can.
Yeah, definitely a good case there. The Rams, you definitely tell that they're starting to fall. You're starting to see more of the inconsistencies that really haven't been an issue for them. And I think part of that has to do with it's starting to become a fact that they're missing out on Cooper Kupp. So I will agree with you on that, but I'm going to take the Patriots side of this. And the reason why I'm taking this is because you look at these past 2 weeks, they aren't really missing anyone offensively or defensively. And I can understand the loss a couple weeks, or I can understand the loss last week against the Dolphins. I mean, that's just a crazy play out of nowhere. I mean, you really can't expect that. You can definitely say that was just a bad fault on Bill Belichick by having Rob Gronkowski in the game on defense. But look at this past week. You're playing a team that's struggling, if not as bad, worse than you are in Pittsburgh. You had opportunities in that game. Chris Boswell even missed a field goal, and he's been doing so bad for them over these past few weeks. He even got booed, and he's been known as one of the better kickers in the NFL. They only scored 10 points this week on the road against the Steelers team. Yeah, that can be okay on defense, but, I mean, they're not necessarily a top 10 defense, I would say, in this league. And they're not injured right now at this point. Most of their players are healthy, so it doesn't make sense for them to only score 10 points in this game. They had good opportunities. We saw some un-Brady-like plays. There was one play where they were in Steelers territory, and he tried throwing the ball out of bounds, and it looked like he was fading away on this throw, and it ended up getting picked off by Joe Hayden. Something's up with this Patriots team right now, and it's not good. You look at their road record this year, under 500. They're 3-5 on the road. So you want to know what? They could still go 8-0 at home. They could still finish with an 11-5 record. But you want to know what happened the last time they lost at least 5 games in the regular season? They lost in the divisional round. So I think that there's something going on. I'm not sure what exactly it is. Maybe it's a sign that some of these players are getting older, like a Tom Brady, like a Rob Gronkowski. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what the answer could be, but they haven't looked the same these past couple of weeks. So I think that and you look at the remaining schedule, they have easier opponents. They play the Jets, they play the Bills, which, yeah, could be 2 wins. But those aren't the kind of games you need to have before going to a playoffs. So I think that they will win these next 2 weeks, but they're going to have a tough time come wild card weekend because they're going to verse a tough team right now. That it could be Los Angeles, possibly, depending on what happens. It could be Baltimore, who has played well with Lamar Jackson. It could possibly be maybe Indianapolis, who's coming off of a huge win this week. They need to worry right now, and they need to figure out their identity again.
One very interesting argument I heard about the Patriots today was actually from First Take, and I think it was Max Kellerman that was talking about this, and he usually has no good points whatsoever, but this one he hit the nail on the head with. He said that Bill Belichick, remember we had that report that he wanted to get rid of Rob Gronkowski, and then also that report that he was thinking about trading Tom Brady. So you look at when Bill Belichick gets rid of players, he seems to get rid of them right before they go in the tank. And by Robert Kraft basically vetoing his ability to trade those guys, you're now seeing that those 2 guys are starting to actually decline, especially Rob Gronkowski, whose production this year has been way down compared to in the past. So you might be seeing the effects of Bill Belichick not being able to actually trade the players he wanted to trade and get new players in to take their place. So this is really the first time in the Patriot era that Bill Belichick might not have the team that he actually wants to have with the players that he wants there. So that could be why things are looking a little bit different for the Patriots. But let's move on to a team that you mentioned. That was the Indianapolis Colts, who absolutely blew out the Dallas Cowboys this week. They beat them 23-0. So the question that I have for you, Ian, is this more of an indictment on the Dallas Cowboys, who we assumed finally got it together, or is this more about the Colts just being a team that is actually very good this year?
I'm going to take the Cowboys side of it, and they just did not look great this past week. I mean, you look at Ezekiel Elliott, he got his carries, and he got a good chunk of yards. But what we've seen this year from Dak Prescott is that he's a very inconsistent quarterback. And you look at his stats this past week, I'm not sure if he either just threw for over 200 yards or threw under 200 yards. He was sacked 3 times, he threw a pick, and he just didn't look that accurate with the ball. When he was missing people, it seemed like he was missing them pretty badly. And you look at when this guy was at Mississippi State in college, you can tell like he was basically a dual threat quarterback. I mean, he ran the ball a huge chunk of the time. And I think right now what's happening is that the Cowboys are trying to make him more of a passing quarterback, which I can understand. But you also have to realize this guy was a dynamic running quarterback in college. You look at that first year he was in the league, he was dominating with his legs on the ground because they were giving him those opportunities. And now they're trying to make him more of a one-dimensional quarterback and focus on just giving Ezekiel the ball. And Dak Prescott is not a one-dimensional quarterback. He is I would say, a better running quarterback than a passing quarterback. And his dual threat ability has not been in effect this year because he's trying to be more of a passing quarterback. But you want to know what? Some of these dual threat quarterbacks are having success in the NFL this year. Look at Lamar Jackson. This guy, I would say, on a scale of less, does not throw the ball as well as Dak Prescott. But he's using his dual threat abilities for himself. And you want to know what? The Ravens are in the wild card right now. Look at Russell Wilson. I mean, their team wasn't expected to do that well this year, but he's always had that dual threat ability, and he's still using it to this day because they're staying in the hunt and are currently in the playoffs. So I think that the Cowboys have to realize that they need to use Dak Prescott more as a dual threat. And I know some of this could be on him for wanting to pass the ball more, but I think both ends have to realize that he's a dual threat. They have to use that more to their play calling. And I think once they do that, that's going to help them build confidence in the passing game because defenses are going to realize that this is a run threat quarterback. So that's going to leave a lot more open space in the passing game, which is definitely going to help them out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll take the Colts side of this because I've noticed the Colts for a while now, ever since they started their season really poorly. A lot of good teams not really being that good. So you could say that the Colts might have a little bit of an overinflated record. So if you look at who they played and who they've beaten in that stretch where they performed well, there's the Bills, there's the Raiders, there's the Jaguars, Titans, Dolphins. None of these teams really scream, Super Bowl run. There's the Texans, and then there's the Cowboys at the lone loss to the Jaguars, which was strange. So it was a 6-0 win. But if you look at the Colts, they finally have a good running back in Marlon Mack, who they use to his full ability versus the Cowboys. And that's really opening things up for Andrew Luck, who is not worrying for his life now behind that offensive line that for a while was much maligned, but now looks like it might actually be pretty good. The question for the Colts is, do they have enough time to turn this around, and will they get some help from the Chargers beating the Ravens? So for the Colts to make the playoffs here, they do, like I said, need the Ravens to lose at least one more game, and then they need themselves to win out. So if they can beat the Giants and the Titans, have the Ravens lose one, then they're going to be in, and they might give some trouble to some teams because they're playing very well right now.
Yeah, and you look at the remaining schedule. I mean, you said the Ravens currently are ahead of them in the tiebreak. The Ravens got a super tough matchup this week against the hot Los Angeles Chargers. So easily could help out the Colts this weekend. Also give you credit. The Colts, they've been playing their best football these past 2 weeks, and they need to. Coming off of that loss against Jacksonville, what have they done? They beat the best team in the AFC South at the Texans, and then getting a huge win against one of the hottest teams coming in this past week in the Dallas Cowboys. So I would say you could even make an argument that Colts are this good, but the Cowboys are this bad this past week. So you can make either point on this. I think both of us are pretty spot on in regards to this. But yeah, I do agree that the Colts are finally finding their I don't know what exactly. They're finally playing the right kind of football that they need to do. And Andrew Luck hasn't been pressured that much this year, which is definitely a helpful thing for them and why they're in the playoff hunt. All right. So, Ryan, what do we got next on our agenda?
Okay, so after we were done talking about the Colts, because you cut out a little bit on me there, but I thought next on our agenda we had a question that we received about coaches.
Oh, yeah. So it brings us to our question of the week, which we posted on our Facebook and Twitter pages and talked about a couple of the most recent head coaching firings in the NFL relating to Hugh Jackson and Mike McCarthy. So with there being two head coaches being let go already, do we think we'll see another one gone before the end of the season? And looking at the results, Facebook and Twitter were basically identical. Twitter, 62% of people said they do not believe another coaching change will happen. And I believe Facebook was about 58% saying there will not be another head coach being let go. So, Ryan, if you had to guess, do you think that we're done seeing coaches fired in the season, or do you think there's still an opportunity for one? And if so, who do you think?
I think with 2 games left, we will probably not see another coach fired during the season, but I think we could see a decent number of coaches fired as soon as the season is over. I'm going to throw a couple names out there for you. Marvin Lewis in Cincinnati, he already has a couple years where people thought he was going to be let go. You have to think that it's time this year to finally let Marvin Lewis go. Looking at the Jets and Todd Bowles, that team has not been performing well for him. There's a glimmer of hope there with the quarterback situation now with Sam Darnold, which they haven't had in a while, but people have become definitely – they've turned away from Todd Bowles, in my opinion, from what I've been hearing. Then you also could look potentially at Jay Gruden. I don't think they're going to fire him, but you never know in Washington with that fan base not being too happy there either. And then the last one, maybe Vance. I wouldn't be surprised to see Vance Joseph go when the year is over either.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you in the part of Marvin Lewis, just because they haven't gotten the job done the last few years. And the fact that they did bring him back again was a huge surprise for people coming into the offseason. Vance Joseph also, just because they haven't really found too much success over the past 2 years with him there in Denver. I think a coach that we should possibly look out for would be Doug Marrone, just because this team's coming off of just missing out on the Super Bowl. And you basically brought everyone back. The only person you lost was you lost Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns. But you still had some good receivers coming back. And they took a huge step back this year. The defense has looked inconsistent at times. The offense has looked dreadful. And you look at right now, they benched Blake Bortles, and I think they look worse with Cody Kessler because they can't score on offense. They have 1 touchdown in 3 weeks with Cody Kessler as your starting quarterback. You cannot tell me that Blake Bortles would be worse these past 3 games. Blake Bortles would at least give you an opportunity to score 1 touchdown a game. But you look at the scores these past 3 weeks. 6 points. It was a win, but only 6 points. 9 points. And then they got their most this week, 13. But the touchdown was on special teams. So you look at Kessler offensively, he's led them to – 5 field goals in 3 games and 1 touchdown. And it was a touchdown that would be overturned on review that could have gone either way you look at it. So they are making I don't think they made the right choice. At first, I was saying it made sense to bench Blake Bortles, but they're playing worse football without him. It doesn't make sense. I understand you want to evaluate the future, but Cody Kessler wasn't going to be your future either way. It would have just made sense to ride the train out with Blake Bortles now and then look to possibly sign a quarterback or draft a new one. But Cody Kessler is clearly not their answer going forward. So I definitely do think that he should be on the hot seat just because of that change.
No, you're absolutely right about that move making no sense to bench Blake Bortles because he's the guy you have money invested in. So you don't have a big investment in Cody Kessler. He's not a rookie that you're trying to get snaps. He's proven that he can't really be a competent quarterback. So what's really the point in having him play out the rest of the year when you're not, playing for anything? You might as well just evaluate Bortles, see if he can make any improvements. And at least if he has some good games, you can showcase him as potential trade bait. There's no reason to have that guy sitting on the bench. I agree with you on that one 100%. But talking about other guys that could end up on the bench, we are going to talk a little bit of Aaron Rodgers. No, the Packers are not anytime soon going to bench Rodgers for another starting quarterback to try to win games. But with the rest of their season basically having no meaning, should the Packers rest Aaron Rodgers to avoid potential injury in the last 2 games?
I mean, it's definitely something that they should consider. I mean, we don't even really know if Rodgers is still 100% healthy from that knee injury. I mean, he's not wearing the brace anymore, and he looks fine in games, but there are some times where you see him slide, and it seems like he's limping a little bit. Now you look at they have 2 games left. One's on the road against the New York Jets. The other one's at home against the Detroit Lions. As much as I could definitely see them just sitting him the next 2 games, I honestly don't think that's what they're going to do, and that's because of the fact that Joe Philbin's there. They want to evaluate Philbin over these next 2 games, even though they're meaningless games going forward in regards to them getting to the playoffs since they're eliminated. They want to see if Joe Philbin can be their coach going forward. And in order to do that, you kind of have to see how Aaron Rodgers is going to do with the team. So as much as it would make sense to possibly do it just to prevent an injury for Rodgers, I think in order to evaluate Philbin as a coach, you have to evaluate him with the full arsenal on offense. So that means Aaron Rodgers has to play these next 2 weeks.
I think that looking at Rodgers playing and watching him and the team interact, it just does not seem like that team has chemistry. And I think part of it is that Rodgers gets all this special treatment. We just never criticize Rodgers. We say the rest of the team around him is bad. And to some degree, that's true, that his offensive line hasn't been good. His receivers have a tendency to not get open as much as they probably should, considering the talent level on that team. The defense is often suspect, which leads to Rodgers having to score more points usually. But this year, Rodgers has a lot to do with why the Packers haven't been playing well. And I think that benching him and saying this guy's too important for us to play in a season that he helped lead to this point is kind of stupid for that team. You need to get that team to grow together. You need that team to fight together even when there's really nothing on the line. And I think you have to play Rodgers in this situation. Because even if he does get hurt, if it's something minor or if something even semi-major, he has a lot of time to recover. And you pay the guy to play football. So why not make him play these last games? There's no reason, in my opinion, to sit him out.
Yeah, and there's an interesting point I want to bring out. It was talking about something you had mentioned earlier, but I was out with a few friends this past weekend. We were talking about Aaron Rodgers, and a lot of people were discussing how we could compare him to a different athlete. And I took an interesting take on this. So I was comparing Aaron Rodgers to Kevin Durant, and the reason why I say this is because you look at Durant, when you see him dominating a game, he just looks like he's one of the most baddest guys in the league, meaning he's unstoppable and he can do anything he wants. But you look at when he's on a team that's struggling or when they're not winning, and you can just see the fiery side of him where he's starting to blame others and just not take things in from other people. And you look at Aaron Rodgers, we've seen a lot of that over the past couple of years. I mean, look at the Los Angeles Rams game, for example. Kind of going off a little bit after the whole incident with Ty Montgomery returning the ball out of the end zone. What happens after that? Well, they trade Ty Montgomery. And you look at what happened earlier this year with Kevin Durant, got into an argument with Draymond Green because Draymond Green took the ball at the end of the game. They end up losing the game in overtime. What happened after they got into an argument? Well, Draymond Green got suspended again. So, unfortunately, the way Aaron Rodgers has kind of been acting, even though he is one of the most gifted athletes in the NFL, he's starting to become a player that players might not want to play with because of the way he acts.
Yeah, I agree totally with that. And I think that's a big part of why the team lacks chemistry, like I said, is that Aaron Rodgers seems like he's only in it for himself. He got the big contract now, and he just doesn't seem like he's going to put it all out there for his team. And it seems like he's more just trying to be flashy. And my brother actually pointed out that he only had those 2 interceptions this year, but his number of throwaways and sacks taken was just way above the average quarterback. And I think a lot of that is he's trying to protect his stats, and he's trying to show that he's a good passer, and then he's sacrificing wins for what he's doing. I mean, how many times did you see Rodgers, instead of just throwing a ball somewhere and giving Davante Adams a chance to catch it, just toss it out of bounds? Like I get that he was injured for part of the year, but he didn't seem like he was really doing everything to win. It seemed like he was just trying to do everything he could not to make a mistake.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that Packers have to look at a little bit, like going into the offseason. Just like maybe they can like get on a better page with Aaron Rodgers to try and figure out these issues. Maybe they can try. It'll be a way of them maybe getting some better assets on offense. But that's just something that we're going to have to look at over these next couple weeks and then into the beginning of the offseason. See if anything is wanting to change for that team, because right now them not being in the playoffs, the best thing some Packers fans might be hoping for is a good draft pick. But because of their record, they're not necessarily going to get a high draft pick, but just kind of middle of the pack. So that's something we'll have to keep an eye on for. But let's speaking of draft, let's kind of switch things over to college football. So we just started the college football bowl season this past week, and we're at that point where we're seeing some of these star players who are projected to be high picks in the draft are letting everyone know that, for the most part, these players are not going to be playing in what looks to be their last football game with their program, trying to get themselves ready for the NFL and kind of take themselves away from getting seriously injured. Ryan, I'm going to ask you this. Do you think that it's a good thing that we're seeing all these star players not playing their bowl games to kind of help them get ready for the draft?
I mean, I get it. I get that they don't want to get hurt. I get that they want to spend time doing other things. They want to probably start getting everything ready for the draft. I mean, I think the biggest reason that makes sense is not getting hurt, because you don't want to go out there in a bowl game, especially one that's technically meaningless, and put everything on the line, end up breaking a leg or tearing an ACL, and then all of a sudden you miss out on millions upon millions of dollars. So it makes sense from an individual perspective. But on the other hand, how can you just abandon these guys that you've been fighting with this whole time and then not play your last game with them? I mean, you've been with these guys the whole time. You've trained together. You've probably roomed with some of them. You've worked out together. You're basically a group of guys that have done everything together for the better part of, some of these players 4 years, and you're just going to skip out on the last game you have with them for personal reasons. It just kind of rubs you the wrong way. Like, I understand the thinking, and a lot of people say that since college football players don't get paid, that they should definitely be sitting out just because it's their right to do so, and it's not fair that they haven't been making money all along when the college makes money. But as somebody who's an athlete and who's played on team sports before, I couldn't possibly see just sitting out while my team is out there struggling to get a win.
Yeah, and I know I've kind of been a fan of, or I've kind of been that guy before, where if you're not injured, you should be doing what you can to help the team out. Something that I have noticed so recently is we see some of these big time players get injured and kind of changes their careers. Look at Jalen Smith currently for the Dallas Cowboys. This guy was projected to be a super high pick in his draft, and he ended up slipping because of an injury he suffered in the bowl game. Look at Jake Butt a couple years ago, tight end now for the Broncos. This guy was projected to possibly be a first-round pick, number one tight end off the board, And what did he do in his bowl game? Tear his ACL, and he ended up dropping like 5 rounds. And like I said, that'll hurt not only your money, but possibilities of you making an NFL team. So I'm not saying that I'm against players or I'm not saying I'm for players missing these games, but I think the only time you should miss a game is if you have an injury. And I mean, when I mean that is if you got injured that year and it's within the second half of the season. If it's an injury that you have within the second half of the season and you just don't feel fully comfortable on it, then I can understand them skipping the bowl game. But if you got injured earlier in the season and are playing perfectly fine, then I think you should go off the play for you. So I think there are certain circumstances where it is okay for these players to sit out, but there's also that fact where if you got injured early in the season and end up playing the full season without no issues, then you should play.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to look at it. I remember a lot of the injuries that happened in college football too happened in players' seasons when they were about to go for the draft, not necessarily in the bowl game. I think it's relatively uncommon that you're going to get seriously injured the last game of the season. A couple that I remember are obviously, what was his name for the Vikings? The receiver, Laquan Treadwell, had that gruesome injury. I think it was versus Alabama, and that wasn't a bowl game. It was just by playing. So if you're going to say that you want to sit out for bowl games, you might as well sit out for large portions of your senior season instead, like some of the players like.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you on that one too. So, I mean, it's just kind of a tough call because these players are forced with the decision of do I turn my back on my team or do I focus on possibly making big money? And unfortunately, that's the decision right nowadays because, like I said, since college athletes don't get paid, they need to worry about their future.
And like I've said earlier, initially, I totally understand that if you're in line to make a huge sum of money and you probably have a family that's counting on you, that's what you're going to want to do. So it's hard to fault these guys. It's something about it kind of rubs you the wrong way, and you sort of think, is this going to be one of those guys that when there's a fumble and he has to dive head first to get the ball, will he actually do it, or will he hang back and make a career move? And that can be the difference sometimes in winning a championship and not winning a championship in the NFL. So I think you kind of can use it as a little bit of a character evaluation. And if a guy has a choice to sit out or go play and he goes and plays, I think that's a guy that you want on your team.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I mean, this will just be something we have to keep an eye out for over the bowl season, see how it affects the teams that aren't playing, and then hopefully we go through an injury-free bowl season where we don't see any NFL prospects get injured. So hopefully that's something that we're able to get through. But let's move on to this upcoming week in the NFL. So looking at the games this week, Ryan, we no longer have Thursday night football. It's just Saturday and Sunday, at least this week. So what game are you most looking forward to watching this week?
There are a couple games that are very entertaining this week, and there's some obvious ones. I'm going to pick one that's not so obvious, but is still entertaining nonetheless, and that's the Houston Texans at the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Texans right now hold the 2 seed in the AFC playoff picture over the Patriots, and the Eagles are still trying to fight their way into a wild card. Carson Wentz. There was just something about that guy entering into the lineup that really helped that team get excited. And so if the Eagles can somehow find a way to beat the Texans, then their last game is against Washington, a game that they'll be favored to win. They could potentially finish out the year with 2 wins, whereas Minnesota, the team they're most likely contending with, has to play Detroit, which they should win, and then Chicago. And Chicago has been a problem for them the last 2 seasons. So the Eagles would actually be looking pretty good if they won this game in Houston. So this is going to be an absolute dogfight between 2 teams that are really jockeying for playoff position. So So I think this is going to be one of the more highly contested games this week, and I could see it going either way, with the Eagles really getting excited to try to make the playoffs in front of their home crowd, and the Texans trying desperately to hold on to that first-round bye.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. The Titans looked like they got back on track this past week. The Eagles also did, especially if there's no Carson Wentz the rest of the year. It'll be interesting to see if Nick Foles can adjust everything. He seemed like he was able to this past week, so if he can do it this week, definitely something to watch out for in the Eagles. But I'm going to go to one of the Saturday night games, and I'm going to look at the Ravens and the Chargers, two of the hotter teams in the NFL right now. Both teams have dominant defenses, and you look at the offenses. The Ravens kind of had to readjust their offense now with Lamar Jackson at the quarterback position. Him and his dual threat abilities have kind of changed their game. They've also had to deal with injuries at the running back spot, and Gus Edwards has played well filling in for Alex Collins. And then, as mentioned before, the Chargers, they're probably the hottest team right now in the NFL, and I think they have to be someone to look out for. I expect this to be, I think it'll be a lower scoring game, but I do believe that whichever team can dominate early, I think whatever team can dominate the best running wise will have the best chance in that game. So look out for the Chargers, though, because if Melvin Gordon's back, they can find some luck in the ground. All right, so Ryan, should we move on to our upset picks now?
Yeah, let's move on to upset picks. And I actually don't see a lot of games that I'm really super crazy about this week. So I'm going to go with one that's a bold prediction just based on that team getting a big win this past week. And that's the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the New Orleans Saints. Saints are playing at home, which is usually a really good situation for them. They rarely ever lose at home. But Pittsburgh's coming in that high off of beating Tom Brady and the Patriots, a team that they lost 5 in a row to previously. So I'm going to take the Patriots over the Saints that have looked like they've been struggling a little bit on offense and have actually had to rely on that defense to carry them lately. Thinking maybe there could be a blueprint out there on how to slow the Saints offense down if you blanket Michael Thomas and try to slow down that running game early. So I'm going to go Steelers. I don't know if I really believe my own pick, but I'm just going to go with the Steelers.
I do like that pick. I mean, the Steelers have not gotten things going offensively these past few weeks, and if they continue to struggle early on in a game, Pittsburgh could have an opportunity to do something in that game. It'll be a tough one on the road, but I do definitely think that they have that ability to do something. I'm going to look at the schedule, and I'm going to pick a team that's actually coming off pulling up an upset this past week, and that's the San Francisco 49ers. They beat the Seattle Seahawks in overtime this past week, and they're doing it, remember, with a Nick Mullins at their quarterback. They're doing it with Matt Breida, who's been banged up all year. I think that they can slow down the Bears. The defense has actually looked pretty good for the 49ers, I'd say, the past couple weeks. So I think that they're able to get a win at home and kind of shake up the playoff standings a little bit in the NFC.
Can we also talk about how impressive George Kittle's been at tight end for the 49ers? That guy has come on huge. He has 72 receptions this year for 1,154 yards.
Yeah, I definitely agree. He's definitely played like one of the best tight ends in the NFL this year. And he doesn't really get talked about that much because of the 49ers' 4-10 record, and also because Zach Ertz has put up such a phenomenal season for the Eagles. But he is definitely a guy that has been a huge surprise. I don't know if I'd say a huge surprise, but if Jimmy Garoppolo is healthy, I mean, I would say he probably has closer to 90 receptions possibly at this point, because he's becoming a favorite, not just his, but of all the quarterbacks for the 49ers.
Yeah, which is crazy for a tight end, because we have not seen tight end usage like that other than Rob Gronkowski really in the league since maybe Antonio Gates or Tony Gonzalez. So it's crazy to have another tight end like that. He might be a fantasy consideration in an earlier draft slot than he was taken by most people this year in most leagues. But Ian, I believe you had another question that you wanted to ask this week about teams that are in the playoff hunt. Am I correct?
Yes, I did have that question. Let me just refresh myself on it. So I had asked of all the teams that currently are in the playoff picture. So looking at the AFC, that would be the Chiefs, the Texans, the Patriots, the Steelers, the Chargers, and the Ravens. And then for the NFC, it would be the Saints, the Rams, the Bears, the Cowboys, the Seahawks, and the Vikings. Of all those teams, which one is in a spot that's going to hurt themselves this week and possibly knock them out of the playoffs?
Okay, I'm going to say a team that's not going to get themselves knocked out of the playoffs, but a team that's going to have their seeding eliminated a little bit. And that's the Texans. So I highlighted this game earlier as a game to watch. The Eagles with Nick Foles have new life, and they are playing in front of a ravenous fan base that still considers them the defending Super Bowl champs because they still technically hold that title, versus a Texans team that I think is a little bit overrated. They lost to the Colts recently. They really played poorly against the Jets and were lucky to escape that game with a win. So I think the Eagles are going to
Yeah, I definitely think that because you can look at both sides of it. I mean, you can look at the Eagles getting a win; they put themselves possibly in position to get into the playoffs, and then Texans they don't necessarily drop out of the playoffs. I mean, they could still technically lose the division. I believe all they need to do is just win this week, and they'll get in, or a loss by either the Titans or the Colts should get them in as well. So I definitely agree that that could be a determining factor this week for possible playoff seedings. I'm going to take a look at Seattle, though, this week. They have a tough matchup at home against the Chiefs. It's a primetime game. And you look at the Chiefs this year when it comes to primetime games on the road. I'm going to look at two of them, the Patriots and the Rams. They've looked impressive, but they were not able to win it towards the end. I think that this week, coming off of a tough loss, losing on a 2-point conversion, I think that they're able to sneak by the Seahawks. Seahawks slip again. You look at any one of those 7-7 teams, or even the Vikings win, that drops them not only possibly to the 6th seed, but possibly out of the playoff picture itself. So I think that that could be a potential playoff make or break game this week.
That really brings up how big that 49ers loss was for the Seahawks, because if they win that, they're looking at 9-5 right now and pretty firmly in that 5th spot in the playoff race. And now they might still be struggling. Like you said, if they lose to the Chiefs, they're going to be sitting at 8-7, when the Philadelphia Eagles, Washington Redskins could be at 8-7, and the Vikings could potentially be at 8-6-1. So all of a sudden, Seattle's talking about perhaps missing the playoffs, whereas just a week ago they were sitting real pretty.
Yeah, definitely. So both the games we mentioned definitely have to keep an eye out for. You look at if the Eagles win and the Seahawks lose, it puts them both at 8-7. So I'm not sure how the tiebreaker would work in that case, but could possibly bump them up there. But Ryan, since we are at around the end of the show, it's time for that time where we talk about fantasy football, and we're at that point where it's just about championship week. Who's someone that you need to add this week, especially for you since you made 2 championships?
Sure. I've got a guy for you, Ian. It's Kalen Ballage from the Miami Dolphins. And Ballage is a great last name for somebody that plays professional sports. But this guy had a big breakout versus the Vikings this week. He had 123 yards, whereas the Dolphins offense only scored a total of 193 yards on offense. So this guy accounted for over 50% of their offensive production. And Kenyon Drake, for some reason, only got 1 carry during the game. So it looks like Ballage might be the guy going forward. So he is definitely worth a pickup if you're struggling at running back and need someone to desperately fill in for a flex spot.
Yeah, definitely. I saw that huge touchdown run he had this past week. So definitely a guy that can burst out and get a big run for your team. And it just seems like that the Dolphins don't trust Kenyon Drake fully. So that's why he's not getting every opportunity in the game. I'm gonna look at a spot that could have possibly helped me, and it's a risky play because of the quarterback that he has. But I think if you need a receiver that could possibly get you 10 points, look at Robert Foster from the Buffalo Bills. You look at his 4 of his past 5 games, he's had over 90 yards receiving, and he always seems like that guy who's able to get a huge catch in a game for like over 40 yards. And Josh Allen, look at he's been putting up fantasy numbers. So, and Foster has been a reason why he's been able to put up some of these numbers with his big playability. So, if you need a guy who could possibly get you a 50-yard grab, maybe a long touchdown, I think Foster could be the guy. Doesn't necessarily have to be a 1 or 2 edge wide receiver. It could be a flex play. So, I definitely think if you have some bang up receivers like I do on one of my teams, then he should be a guy you should foster or roster.
He's a pretty good pickup. I actually am considering picking him up in my leagues because my wide receivers have been dismal this year. So that would be great to add somebody that could actually get me over 10 points at receiver. But that brings us to the end of our show for tonight. Is there anything you want to say to the listening folks before we get going?
Yeah, just want to thank everyone again listening to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesday, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. Make sure to give us a listen each week on either iTunes, Google Play, or Spreaker. Follow us on our social media pages. You can search us on Facebook, just Touchdown Tuesdays, or if you want to search us on Twitter, you can search by the name or at the handle TDWN2 Podcast. Keep an eye out for our question of the week. It'll be posted on both our Facebook and Twitter pages. And if you do happen to have any questions or debate topics that you'd like us to discuss next week, feel free to tweet or comment on our page and we will answer those for you. Again, just want to thank everyone for listening, and we look forward to talking to you sometime next week during the holidays.
Yep, absolutely. We'll see you next week, everybody. Have a good rest of your week.